I've always had an affinity for the abandoned spaces of the city, those forgotten fragments of urban decay that most people overlook. So when I first heard about the old subway station buried beneath the heart of downtown, hidden and untouched for decades, my curiosity was piqued. It was the kind of place urban legends are born from, and as an urban explorer, it was an irresistible lure. It took weeks of meticulous research and discreet inquiries before I found an access point. It was a narrow, rusted hatch, half concealed by overgrowth in an inconspicuous alley. My heart raced with anticipation as I pried it open one evening, under the cover of darkness. The hatch groaned in protest, echoing into the unseen depths below. Descending the creaking ladder, I felt the air grow cooler and mustier with each rung. When my boots finally hit solid ground, I was enveloped in suffocating darkness. Flicking on my flashlight, the beam cut through the gloom, revealing a long, deserted platform. Layers of dust blanketed everything, and a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence pressed against my ears. I moved slowly along the platform, my light dancing over faded advertisements peeling from the walls and a ticket booth shrouded in cobwebs. The thrill of the discovery quickened my pulse. This was a capsule of time, hidden beneath the bustling city streets. As I ventured further, the flashlight's beam fell upon the tracks. They were partially collapsed in places, a testament to the years of neglect. That's when I noticed it. A crack in the ground near the edge of the platform. It was unlike the natural wear and tear around it. This crack was oddly precise, almost deliberate, running straight and narrow into the darkness of the tunnel. Curiosity overcame caution. I stepped over the threshold, my boot landing squarely on the crack. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration shuddered through the soles of my shoes. It was strange, but I shrugged it off as a trick of my imagination. With each step forward, the crack seemed to respond. It was as though my presence was awakening something within it. I couldn't shake off the eerie feeling that I was not alone, that something unseen was watching me from the shadows. The air grew colder, and a faint whispering seemed to float on the edges of my hearing. Continuing along the platform, I could swear the crack was widening. Each return of my flashlight to it revealed a slightly larger gap. An unsettling thought began to gnaw at my mind. Was the crack reacting to my steps? A sudden noise, a skittering like pebbles falling, echoed from deep within the tunnel. I froze, shining my light into the black maw of the subway. But there was nothing, only the oppressive silence returning. Deciding I had enough for the night, I made my way back to the ladder. As I climbed, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, back to the crack that had now become a small chasm. It felt like a warning, a boundary not meant to be crossed. Emerging back into the alley, the night air felt heavier than before, as if charged with a silent storm. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something otherworldly, something ancient and hidden, lurking just beneath our feet. As I walked home, the city around me felt different, as if I was seeing it through a new lens. I couldn't ignore the cracks on the sidewalks, each one seemingly staring back at me, hiding its own secrets in the depths below. Ever since that night in the forgotten subway station, my dreams have been haunted by echoes of the abyss. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the image of the widening crack etched in my mind. But it wasn't just the dreams. Reality itself seemed to warp around me. I began to notice odd occurrences in my apartment. Objects seemed to move on their own. Books falling off shelves without a breeze or a shake. My nights were disturbed by sounds that didn't belong in my usually quiet abode, faint whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls and floors, and a constant low vibration that I felt more than heard. The most unsettling change, however, was the shadows. They seemed darker, more pronounced, as if they were more than mere absence of light. Sometimes I caught glimpses of movements in the periphery of my vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I tried to dismiss these occurrences as the product of stress or an overactive imagination, but deep down, I knew something was amiss. A palpable sense of dread began to cling to me, a feeling that something was profoundly wrong. A week after my venture into the station, I returned, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion. The hatch opened more easily this time, as if inviting me in. Descending into the darkness, I felt an oppressive weight in the air, a thickness that made it hard to breathe. The platform was as I left it, suspended in time, but the crack, it had grown. Now it was more like a fissure, a jagged tear in the earth that seemed to pulse faintly, rhythmically, as if it were breathing. I approached it hesitantly, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't help but step on it again, a decision that immediately filled me with regret. The ground trembled under my feet, a low rumble that resonated up through my bones. The walls of the tunnel groaned, dust cascading from the ceiling. I felt a pull, an unseen force tugging at the core of my being, emanating from the depths of the crack. Frightened, I stepped back, and the trembling ceased. But the damage was done. Something had been awakened. A sound, like a sigh, echoed from the darkness of the tunnel, sending shivers down my spine. As I quickly made my way back to the ladder, I noticed an old man standing at the entrance of the alley, watching me intently. His eyes were clouded with age, but there was a sharpness to them, a knowing that unnerved me. "You shouldn't disturb what lies beneath," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "Some doors are closed for a reason." I wanted to ask him who he was, how he knew about the station, but my voice failed me. Instead, I hurried past him, feeling his gaze boring into my back. That night, the disturbances in my apartment intensified. The whispers grew louder, forming words I couldn't quite understand. The shadows twisted and writhed in the corners of my rooms, and the feeling of being watched became almost tangible. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, but a growing part of me knew the truth. The crack in the subway station was more than a physical fissure. It was a gateway, and I had unwittingly opened it. Now, whatever lay on the other side was seeping into my world, into my life, and I feared what it might bring. The disturbances in my life had escalated to a point where denial was no longer an option. I was being drawn into something far beyond my understanding, something that transcended the boundaries of the known world. Despite the old man's warning, I felt an inexorable pull back to the subway station. I needed answers. The night air was thick with a foreboding stillness as I approached the hatch. It seemed to open on its own accord, creaking ominously, as if it were a portal to another realm. I descended, the familiar musty scent of the underground greeting me like an old, unwelcome friend. Reaching the platform, I was struck by an eerie sight. The crack had grown exponentially, now a gaping chasm that split the platform in two. A strange, pulsating light emanated from within, casting ghostly shadows that danced along the walls. The air was charged with an electric tension, the kind that precedes a storm. I approached the edge, peering into the abyss. It was as if I was looking into the heart of another world, one that was dark, twisted, and utterly alien. The light pulsed rhythmically, and with each beat, I felt a surge of energy ripple through the air, brushing against my skin like a whisper. Then, without warning, the unthinkable happened. From the depths of the chasm, a creature emerged. It was unlike anything I had ever seen or could have imagined. A grotesque amalgamation of limbs and eyes, its skin a mottled tapestry of darkness. It clambered onto the platform with a fluid, unsettling grace. Frozen in shock, I could only watch as the creature paused, tilting its head as if sensing the air. Then, with a speed that belied its size, it scuttled down the tunnel, disappearing into the shadows. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The chasm was a gateway, and I had unwittingly unleashed these creatures into our world. Panic gripped me, a cold, clawing dread that threatened to overwhelm my senses. I knew I had to act, to find a way to close the gateway before more of these beings poured through. I rushed back to the surface, my mind racing with fear and guilt. The city was eerily quiet, the streets deserted. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the coming storm. I had to find the old man, the only other person who seemed to know about the station. I scoured the streets, my heart pounding in my chest, but he was nowhere to be found. Desperate, I returned to the station, hoping to find some clue, some way to reverse what I had done. But the station was no longer the same. The air was thick with a palpable malevolence, and the walls seemed to pulsate with a sinister energy. The chasm had widened further, the light from within casting an otherworldly glow that bathed the entire platform. I stood at the edge, staring into the abyss, when I heard it, a skittering sound echoing through the tunnel. More creatures were coming. I turned to run, but it was too late. They poured onto the platform, a nightmarish horde of writhing limbs and gnashing teeth. I ran, my lungs burning, my heart a thunderous drumbeat in my ears. I could hear them behind me, feel their breath on my neck. I knew I couldn't outrun them, but I had to try. I had to warn the city, to tell them of the horror I had unleashed. As I emerged onto the street, the night erupted into chaos. The creatures swarmed through the city, their alien shrieks piercing the night. People ran screaming, a tide of panic sweeping through the streets. I ran with them, my mind numb with terror. I had opened a door to another world, and now we were paying the price. The city was under siege, and I knew that unless I found a way to close the gateway, this was only the beginning. The city was in pandemonium. Chaos reigned as the creatures from the chasm roamed the streets, their alien forms striking terror in the hearts of everyone they encountered. I navigated the panicked crowds, my mind racing with guilt and desperation. I had to find a solution, a way to seal the gateway I had inadvertently opened. In the midst of the chaos, I remembered the old man's cryptic warning and his knowing eyes. He seemed to understand the nature of what lay beneath the city. Driven by this slender thread of hope, I made my way to the local library, a place where I believed I could find some historical records or lore about the subway station. The library was deserted, a stark contrast to the bedlam outside. I scoured through old newspapers, city planning documents, and local history books, searching for any mention of the subway station or similar occurrences. Hours slipped by, each minute heightening my sense of urgency. Finally, I stumbled upon an old journal, buried under a stack of dusty books. It belonged to a city planner from the early 1900s who wrote about the construction of the subway. In hushed, fearful tones, he described an ancient artifact unearthed during the excavation, believed to hold the power to open and close doorways between worlds. The artifact was a relic of a forgotten time, a key to a lock that should never have been opened. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and excitement. This artifact could be the solution, the means to close the chasm. But the journal was vague about its location, mentioning only that it was kept deep within the station's maze-like underbelly for safekeeping. Without a moment's hesitation, I set out for the station, the journal clutched tightly in my hand. The city around me was a battleground, the air filled with the sounds of chaos and destruction. But my resolve was firm. I had to right the wrong I had caused. Reaching the station, I descended once again into the darkness. The chasm was now a roaring abyss, the air around it vibrating with otherworldly energy. I could feel the pull of the other world, a siren call that both terrified and beckoned. Using the journal as a guide, I navigated the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the station. The passages were a twisted network of forgotten corridors and abandoned rooms, each turn leading deeper into the bowels of the earth. Time lost meaning as I delved deeper, the only sound my own ragged breathing and the distant, haunting echoes of the creatures above. The weight of the city's fate pressed heavily on my shoulders, driving me forward through the oppressive darkness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I found it. Hidden in a secluded chamber, obscured by time and shadows, was the artifact. It was an ancient, ornate box, inscribed with symbols that seemed to shimmer and shift in the dim light. As I reached out to take it, a chilling realization struck me. The air in the chamber grew colder, and I felt a presence, an otherworldly entity that had been guarding the artifact. Its form was ethereal, a wraith-like shadow that hovered at the edge of my vision. I knew then that the artifact was not unguarded. The entity let out a piercing scream, a sound that resonated with the anguish of 1,000 lost souls. I grabbed the artifact and ran, the wraith's scream echoing in my ears. Emerging back onto the platform, I was greeted by a scene of devastation. The city was under siege, its streets overrun by the creatures. But I had the key, the means to end this nightmare. As I approached the chasm, the artifact began to pulse with a brilliant light, resonating with the energy of the gateway. I could feel its power, an ancient force that transcended time and space. With a final, determined breath, I opened the artifact. A blinding light engulfed the station, the air vibrating with the release of pent-up energy. The chasm shuddered, the light from within flickering and dimming as the gateway began to close. But the cost was high. The energy from the closing gateway surged through me, its otherworldly essence intertwining with my own. I could feel it changing me, transforming me into something both less and more than human. As the light faded and the chasm sealed shut, I collapsed to the ground, the artifact slipping from my grasp. The creatures, cut off from their world, dissipated into shadows, their screams fading into silence. The city was saved, but at what cost? I lay there, in the darkness of the subway station, forever changed by the otherworld's touch. I had closed the gateway, but I could never close the door to the horrors I had witnessed and the part of me that now belonged to that other, dark world. In the aftermath of sealing the chasm, the world above seemed to resume its normal rhythm, oblivious to the brink of calamity it had teetered on. But for me, life had irrevocably changed. The city's streets, once familiar, now felt alien, as if I was walking through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Physically, I appeared unscathed, but inside, I was a maelstrom of otherworldly energies and haunting visions. My dreams were no longer my own, filled instead with glimpses of that dark, twisted realm. Its shadow had intertwined with my essence, leaving a part of itself within me. I could feel it, a constant presence lurking just beneath my consciousness, whispering secrets in a language I couldn't understand, but somehow felt in my bones. Despite the chaos having ceased, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The city felt different, as if it concealed a secret that only I was privy to. The cracks on the streets and the walls were no longer mere imperfections. They were scars, reminders of the fragile barrier between our world and the unspeakable horrors that lay beyond. In the weeks that followed, I tried to return to my old life, but the mundane routine felt empty and meaningless. I was haunted not only by the memories of what had transpired, but also by the fear of what might still come to pass. The artifact, though it had sealed the gateway, now lay in my possession. A dangerous relic that I dared not use, yet feared to relinquish. One evening, as I walked the desolate streets, I found myself standing before the old man's house, the one who had warned me about the subway station. Compelled by a need for closure, I knocked on his door. He answered, his eyes reflecting a depth of knowledge and sorrow. Without a word, he invited me in. His home was a trove of ancient books, artifacts, and relics. He was a keeper of secrets, a guardian of forgotten lore. We talked for hours, the old man listening intently as I recounted my tale. He nodded, his expression grave, understanding the burden I now carried. The artifact you possess is ancient, as old as time itself, he explained. It is a key to doors that should never be opened, a bridge to realms that mortals should never tread. I asked him what I should do, how I could rid myself of the visions and the haunting presence that lingered within me. There is no simple answer, he said, his voice tinged with regret. What you have experienced has changed you. You have glimpsed the void, and it has left its mark. You must learn to live with this part of yourself, to control it, lest it controls you. He offered to teach me, to help me understand the power that I now harbored. It was an offer born of necessity, for the knowledge I needed to contain the darkness within me was not found in any ordinary book or scroll. And so, I became the old man's apprentice, delving into arcane studies and esoteric practices. It was a journey of self-discovery, of learning to balance the darkness with the light. As the days turned into months, I found a semblance of peace. The visions, though never fully gone, became more like echoes, less intrusive. I learned to live with the otherworldly part of me, to use it as a source of strength rather than fear. But the city, with its cracks and shadows, remained a constant reminder of the thin veil between worlds. I knew that there would always be a part of me that belonged to that dark realm, a part that I would forever carry. In the quiet moments, I often found myself wondering about the other side of the gateway, about the worlds that lay beyond our understanding. I knew I would never seek them out again, but the curiosity, the pull of the unknown, remained. And so, I walked the streets of the city, a guardian of a secret that few will ever know. The artifact, safely hidden away, is a burden I willingly bear. For I have seen what lies beyond the cracks, and I know the importance of keeping that door firmly closed.